depths of Anatolia to study at university. But that city was not an innocent beginning, but the threshold of a dark journey. What Nesrin didn't know was that the fears that followed her would not just be imagination, but reality itself. When Nesrin opened the door of the dormitory, a pungent smell of dampness filled the air. The air carried the smell of old and rotten stones. The corridors were cold and gloomy. As he took his steps, faint whispers echoed off the walls. "There is something here, waiting for you." Was this voice real, or was it a trick of her mind? Nesrin thought it was her subconscious fears whispering. For the first few days, everything seemed normal, but as the nights progressed, the restlessness increased. Every night, she felt like something was watching her. First a slight chill, then the feeling of an invisible hand touching her body. When she closed her eyes, a silhouette appeared in the darkness. When she opened her eyes again, everything was gone. It was already past midnight. While the other girls in the dorm were fast asleep, she still couldn't sleep. The invisible weight on her chest wouldn't let her sleep, despite the tiredness on her eyelids. Just as she closed her eyes and tried to drift off, she heard a deep, muffled gasp coming from the doorway of her room. Someone was there. The breathing was slow and regular at first, but as if something realized she had noticed, the sound suddenly stopped. His heart was pounding like it was going to burst out of his chest. His whole body was on tenterhooks. Slowly, almost tiptoeing, he approached the door. His hand reached for the cold metal knocker, his fingers trembling. He took a deep breath and opened the door quickly. The hallway was empty, but something had changed. For a moment, the air was filled with the smell of rotten wood and damp earth. It was as if something had stood in front of the door and then disappeared, invisible to the eye. Only the creepy smell remained. Frightened, she closed the door and hurried back to bed, pulling the covers over her and breathing deeply. But just then, he heard the subtle clicks coming from the headboard. Knock, knock, knock. The wood was moving, but consciously, as if it was breathing, as if something was trying to get out of it. He stared at the head of the bed. There was nothing in front of him, but the rattling continued. It echoed like a thick, muffled sound. His body was petrified, unable to escape. And then, from that night on, the eyes began. Every night, a pair of eyes glowed in the dark corners of the room. At first, he thought it was just a hallucination caused by exhaustion. But then he realized these eyes were there every night, fixed, unmoving, not even breathing, and worst of all, only he noticed. As the nights went on, she could feel that look even when she closed her eyes. Someone or something was watching him. Worse, that ominous whisper inside him was becoming clearer and clearer. At first it sounded like mumbling, then it became intelligible words. "He will come closer. He is waiting for you." The sound was seared directly into his mind, echoing from every corner of the room. But the real terror came that night. As he tossed and turned in his sleep, even with his eyes closed, he felt a pair of eyes staring at him from a few inches away. A cold breath touched his face. He felt them looking at him from a few inches away. A cold breath touched his face. And then, a hand slipped under the covers. Cold, bony fingers moved slowly up her legs. She couldn't move. A scream lodged in her throat, but she couldn't make a sound. A deep, ominous whisper echoed in his ears. "You can no longer sleep." Every time he closed his eyes, A deep, cold breath would pass right by his ears. But in the morning, the darkness continued to make him think that everything was normal. The truth was hiding in the most terrible way. And that truth was too dark and cursed to be told to anyone. The cold that covered Nesrin's body no longer waited for the night. With every step, that dark feeling walked with her until morning. The cracks in the headboard grew a little bigger every night. The voices whispering between the walls came one step closer every day. One night, Nesrin woke up to see a silhouette by her bedside. But that silhouette soon disappeared. When she noticed the ancient earthy smell brought by the wind, her heart began to race. It was not just the breath of something rotten, but of a soul buried beneath the earth. And the scream that echoed in his room that night was not that of a human being. It was coming from beneath the ground. One night, he heard a whispering in his room, but it was like echoes coming from the depths of her mind. Everything has a price. Nesrin understood now. The spell had already sucked her in. In her dream, she saw eyes glowing in the dark. There was something in those eyes that belonged to her, but it was too late. When Nesrin woke up, she realized that someone else was in her room. A silhouette appeared in the shadows just behind the headboard. When she slowly turned her head, a woman was sitting quietly in front of her. It was Aishi, who was in the next room. But her gaze, her eyes, were empty, deep, bottomless, and cold. When Nesrin looked into those eyes, she felt like she had fallen into a grave. Aishi's eyes were telling her something, but it wasn't just fear, it was fate. Aishi never spoke. She only looked with her eyes, and that look penetrated every cell inside Nesrin. There was no turning back now. The jinn had taken their toll. Nesrin's soul had disappeared with the darkness. It now waited in the room like a living being. One night, the lights came on in Aishi's room. At first, she attributed the flickering lights to a power cut. But this time, the light never went out. It was as if something was trying to make its presence known with this light. Nesrin looked through the window into Aishi's room with sleepless eyes and saw the shadows moving slightly inside, but no one had entered the room. At that moment, a chilling coldness descended on her room. Trembling, he got up from his bed and opened the door. As he approached Aishi's room, a voice inside him screamed at him to go back, but an unknown attraction was pulling him closer to the door. When he pushed the door slightly, there was only one thing inside: Aishi's shoes, standing in the middle of the room, as if someone had left in a hurry. But there was no sign of Aishi in the room. Just then, a whispered voice echoed in his mind. "Come, come, find me." Nesrin's body froze. This voice was not Aishi's voice. It was something older, something deeper. The moment she stepped into the room, she felt it breathing. The walls, the shoes, everything vibrated with a rhythm. The darkness was more real than ever. As the night passed, the whispers she heard gave way to clear voices. There was something in the room now, and its presence was growing stronger every day. When Nesrin opened her eyes in her bed, she found an old, rusted bracelet in her room. There was a name engraved on it, Aishi. When she picked up the bracelet, a deep chill ran through her. Suddenly, her door slowly opened. Someone was standing behind the threshold. Aishi's eyes stared at Nesrin like a bottomless void. "Can you see me?" she whispered. But her voice echoed not from her own lips, but directly from Nesrin's mind. Nesrin stepped back, but Aishi moved forward. Aishi's eyes were completely empty, but there was something in them. Something was watching her. The moment Aishi touched her cold, dry fingers to Nesrin's arm, Nesrin's soul collapsed. It was as if every part of her being was being pulled elsewhere. The spell was being completed. Nesrin was now bound to the darkness. She had lost her soul. That night, when Nesrin woke up, a shadow moved in Aishi's room. But it was not the shadow of a person. It had no face, no body. There was only darkness. It was born not from Aishi's lost body, but from somewhere else, out of the darkness. "You can't leave me." The sound of that thing was engraved in Nesrin's mind. She stepped back, wanted to close the door, but it was too late. The darkness was already with her. That thing was not just a presence, it was a destiny. Behind the door, there was an endless emptiness. In the morning, there was something in Nesrin's room, but it was no longer Nesrin. Her eyes were too dull to belong to human eyes. Her body was still here, but the soul inside no longer belonged to her. The walls of the room darkened, and the dormitory grew colder and colder. Her once smiling face was now a shell. The darkness had swallowed Nesrin's body, but the story did not end there. One day, a new student will come to that dormitory, and that night, a new story will begin. Because the darkness always waits and never sleeps. And at that very moment, for more of these terrible secrets, don't forget to subscribe, because the next story will find you. Fear always waits, and the darkness never sleeps. Come on, turn off the light now.